Just curiously, how long are your episodes?
30 minutes.
Okay, just so I know how in depth to go.
This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. You are special. Now, most of us don't set out to be special, but sometimes the way we show up in the world, the choices we make, the compassion that we extend to others leads us through that lens. This podcast highlights those individuals, parents, teachers, medical professionals, caregivers, coaches, all who are recognized because they are the beacons of light. I'm speaking with those who have developed tools, insight, and strength, not to only guide their own paths, but to help you and me. Today's guest is Daniela Wolfe. And one of the things that I found in Daniela's Podmatch bio, she says she helps stressed, burnt out professionals ditch the guilt and overwhelmingness. Well, you know what, Daniela? I think I'm going to be a hard nut to crack because I am stressed, I'm burnt out, and yet I just keep going because I expect it of myself, even if my clients don't. So give us some background. How did you reach this conclusion and how are you helping others?
Sure. Thank you so much, Karen. So I've been a social worker for the last 30 years. So I'm clinically trained in all things mindfulness, stress management, coping skills, all that type of stuff, mental health. I'm also a mom of two. And about 20 years ago, I probably drove myself into my own burnout, which is where this journey started. I was going through a divorce. My kids were about 4 and 6 months old. And again, those expectations you talked about, I was trying to do it all, be it all, prove that I was capable, that I could handle all of it. And in the process was irritable, snapping at my kids, not showing up as the woman and mom that I knew I could be and wanted them to remember. So I kind of had a meltdown moment and decided that that was it. Things were going to change. So I started using the skills I help everybody else with on myself. It started with a simple gratitude practice, listing 3 to 5 things every day I was grateful for. Our grocery store at the time had free childcare, as well as I joined a gym with free childcare, and just taking some small intentional actions consistently. I started to see not only was I showing up better, but so were my kids. So was I doing well at work, and in all these other areas, as well as people were gravitating towards me and asking, what was I doing? How was I fitting this in? As well as even sending me messages, sharing moments that they took for themselves because of something I said or did. And I realized we're all looking for that validation and permission that it's okay to take time for ourselves. And not only is it okay, but it's as necessary as eating, sleeping, and brushing your teeth on a daily basis.
Well, I have two sons. They're 15 years apart. So it's like being a mother two different times.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my youngest son, when he was 6 years old, was diagnosed on the autism spectrum. Very high functioning. 99% of the people who meet him would have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
But I became so devoted to what autism was
Mm-hmm.
that I was living, breathing it, eating it all the time. And
Yeah.
I didn't realize how stressed out I was and how I was stressing him out,
Mm-hmm.
especially in his early years, because I would jump every time I heard a pin drop thinking, oh my gosh, what does he need? And most of the time he didn't need anything. I didn't believe then that it was okay to take time for myself. So how
Mm-hmm.
did you realize as a mom that it's okay? I can take time for me.
Yeah, it was definitely, it took some work. It's not a one and done overnight kind of thing. Like I said, my journey started almost 20 years ago. My kids are 24 and 20 now, and it's been a process. The way I help people, the formula I've developed, it's called the Exhausted to Empower formula. And there's 3 main components. And that first one is your mindset. It's based on your mindset, your time planning, and your self care, but your mindset. Because, like you said, I had to change the way I was thinking about taking time for myself, how letting go of what I assumed other people's expectations are, letting go of some of that guilt. and changing the conversation that was happening in my head. Because when you think differently, you feel differently. And when you feel differently, you act differently. So it, took some practice as far as figuring out where some of those mindsets came from. The fact that I thought I had to hustle and be available 24/7 to be committed, that I had to, always show up, always say yes, handle everything myself. And once I kind of saw not only where that came from, but started to change those statements, started to change, that it was okay to ask for help, that it was helping others by letting them help me, that I could be productive and capable and take time for myself, those types of things, whether it's through personal affirmations, those kind of things, you start to change the neural pathways in your brain. You change the structure of how you're thinking, and so that your thoughts start to then travel these new paths, these new ways of thinking. So it takes intention and practice to start to change that. I also want to say too, you were talking about, like with your own son and what he was going through. People assume, burnout comes from things we don't like, but it actually comes, science has shown, it's more from the things we're passionate about, whether it's our kids, our relationship, our businesses. That's where the burnout comes from, because we toss our boundaries out the window. We put ourselves at the back of the bus kind of thing, as well as, we show up for everybody else except for ourselves. We ride the highs and lows more intensely because those are the things we really care about. Like you said, you jumped at the drop of a hat. And so that's a lot of times too, where we set ourselves up for burnout, when we don't have those boundaries in place to protect us, as well as, because it's not always about saying no, it's about saying yes to ourselves.
So, it's interesting because I grew up in a family where I had a working mom back in the 50s and 60s. And I knew there were certain things that she expected of me and my brothers when we came home from school while she was at work. And what happened for me was I started taking on that burden because I have two older brothers who they didn't want to straighten up the house for mom or,
Right.
start the water boiling for dinner or whatever it was. And so I just took it upon myself. Oh, I have to do it because I'm the female. And
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of women out there, especially between the ages of 40 and 70 right now, who have taken on that persona that, well, I have to do it. I'm the mom, I'm the wife, I'm the woman of the house. How do we start changing those tapes? Because it took me a long time.
Absolutely. Have you ever heard of eldest daughter syndrome? So even
No,
though you weren't the oldest, you were the oldest daughter,
yeah,
and it seems to be that's where the majority of the responsibility and all of those expectations fall. Even like you said, nobody tells you to. It's these unwritten expectations that we assume people expect from us, as well as that message we are given that you can do everything. But just because we can do anything we want doesn't mean we should be doing all of it. There's this invisible load that women carry, especially in relationships, a lot of times when it comes to just knowing what's for dinner, when people's birthdays are, planning for holidays, all sorts of different things, and learning the different parts of that invisible load of what we're carrying. So many times people in our lives, they'll want to help us, but they might, say, an example I had heard was, say your kid has a birthday party. They might take the kid to the party and drop them off. But that's the third part of that whole process of knowing there was a party, picking out the gift, buying it, having it on the calendar, all those other pieces of a task. If someone needs to go to the dentist, who's making the appointment, who's scheduling it, who's knowing it needs to be on the calendar. It's not just about carrying out the action, but the mental pieces that go into planning events. So when it comes to changing, like you said, that expectation, it's not about someone helping you do the things and you still keep track of the list of everything that has to get done. It's about completely unloading those tasks where you have no more responsibility for them, whether it's in your business, in your household, those types of things. And that can be really hard to let go of, but it's a process. Definitely start small with the easiest thing, the one that feels the least heavy, because the more you get used to it, then it's easier to take on some of the bigger tasks.
it's funny how you say that the person who's responsible for making the appointments and, keeping track. I've always kept a calendar. My
Mhm.
husband does not. Um, and so when he needs a medical appointment, his comment for the last 41 years that we've been married has been, well, you know my schedule. Just go ahead
Mhm.
and book it. And I've done that for years, 41 years. And the other day he mentioned that he needed a dentist appointment. And I said, you know your schedule, book it, give it to me. I'll put it on the calendar once you book it. And he just said, okay. And I thought, now, wait a second, what am I missing? Because
Mhm.
I always assumed, that this was my responsibility. And I felt a big burden come off my shoulders. It was like,
Yeah.
oh, I don't have to do this. Okay, I can put it on my calendar because
Mhm.
he looks at my calendar, but okay, I don't have to make the appointment. I don't have to be responsible.
Yeah, and that's such a gift you're giving him as well. As you're talking, I think of, my parents are going through some things right now. My mom was you. She was the manager of the calendar and the appointments and things like that. She's no longer in the position where she's able to do that. And my dad is now, for the first time in his life, having to make the appointments, keep track of the appointments, and he'll say to me, he's like, I'm used to your mom being my calendar, my memory.
Yeah, my husband has said the same words, but it when he did this the other day, I just looked at him and I said, "Thank you." And he goes, "But you never asked." And I think
Yeah.
that's where many of us get caught up and carrying all
Mhm.
that stress because either we don't know how to ask or we're afraid that somebody's going to say no.
Right. But it's a gift definitely that you're giving them, you're empowering them, as well as you're teaching them what your boundaries are. I'm here for you, but I'm not here to be you, you know? You're not here to be what he needs in that way. He can make his own appointments and things like that. And like you said, so many times it's the conversation we assume in our head that we think they'll say no. We think they'll
Yes.
think less of us. They'll feel bad. And half the time it's not true, but we don't give ourselves that same grace and kindness that we give to other people.
Yep, absolutely. So when you realized that you were taking on too much, you were overwhelmed, you were stressed, and you said, well, hey, I help other people. Now it's time to help me. Did you notice people
Mm-hmm.
reacting to you differently?
Mhm. Like I said, people were not only asking what I was doing, they were sharing moments. Like, hey, I thought of you and I did X, Y, and Z instead of, maybe their routine that they normally would have been in. And the thing is, too, I noticed the boundaries when I was putting these boundaries in place when it came to protecting my time about doing something for me, whether it was going to the gym, time with my family that I wasn't working at that moment and things like that. When I communicated what those boundaries were, people were fine with it. A lot of times, like you said, we think people are going to be upset, but when you communicate your boundaries, not only do people respect it, but they learn how to treat you. They learn what you need. And then in turn, they start reciprocating with that same kind of action. And so it truly is, a gift that you give others when you put a boundary in place and you say yes to yourself. Not only then you don't have any resentment, any regrets, and those kind of things, but it lets people know, hey, taking care of yourself is important. She thinks she's important enough to take time for this, those types of things. And it really does start to shift then kind of how almost like the vibe that everybody's working with, the culture, whether it's at work, in that kind of corporate culture and those types of things, at home, like for me, I have my morning routine and my nighttime routine. And my kids would know, if they caught me during one of those times, that's mom's reading time at night before she goes to bed. That's mom's workout time in the morning. And it varies. Some days it's 10 minutes, some days it's 20 minutes. It's not always these huge bursts of time, but they respect that boundary because they know that I've said that's important to me, as well as they've learned from that modeling how to start taking care of themselves, what needs to happen so that they prioritize themselves on their to-do list in that type of way. So it's definitely starting with that mindset, then looking at my time and how I'm not only prioritizing what has to happen, but also protecting my boundaries around that other time, where then you can fit in that last piece that I love to talk about, which is self-care, because it's not about, these huge grandiose things. Micro moments of self-care throughout your day are how you start to then pour back into yourself.
It's interesting because we've been empty nesters for quite a while. My son has been visiting for the last couple weeks, and
Mm-hmm.
he's a young adult. It's not that he needs my attention, but he's lived so far away from us that him visiting, I want to be available. But he has picked up on when I need my alone time.
Mm-hmm.
He's very good at just shutting the door to the bedroom, and I know, okay, he wants his alone time. I don't necessarily shut the door unless I'm here in the office recording. And I've noticed the kindness that he has given me. And I've asked him, I said, what has changed? And he said, well, number one, living on my own, I know how
Mm-hmm.
much downtime I need. He said, but I also realize all the things that you do, and you don't just necessarily take downtime. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
lying down, or if you're watching a TV program, or if you're in the office writing with the door open, I know that's your time. You can have it. I'll wait till you get up, or you contact me. Um, and I didn't do that the whole time he was living here. Again,
Mm-hmm.
he didn't move out till he was like 29 years old. And I was always on call, not because he asked me to, but because I felt I had to be. So
Right.
it took a long time for me to understand boundaries as well. What are some of the tools that you offer to your clients when you're talking to them? Because setting boundaries is very difficult. That was the
Mm-hmm.
hardest thing for me. And especially with my own clients, when a client says, you know, I really need to have you coach me in the evening. And I'm going, don't have any evening hours because I've
Mm-hmm.
chose not to have them. I'll refer you to another coach, and have them go, oh, please, please, for me. And it's like, in the beginning, I was doing that. And
Mm-hmm.
now I don't. I finally realized my time is very valuable.
Mm-hmm.
So any
Yeah.
tools that you can offer us?
Yeah. And like I said, those three pillars of your mindset, your time planning, your self-care, but also reframing the way they think of their work-life balance, work-life harmony, work-life flow, because it's not about everything being equal. Some people choose not to use the word balance because of that. I don't believe balance comes from everything being equal either. That's not realistic. Balance comes from how you adapt, how you pivot, how you have resilience, and how you have those boundaries. And those four components work together to help you feel aligned in your day between the things you have to do, the things you want to do. And so they work in a way that works for you. And like you said, communicating them, you wouldn't try and twist your dentist's arm and be like, come on, you're going to make an extra appointment spot for me. The dentist tells you when they're available. And that's when you make the appointment for. And so, being able to adapt and pivot because life happens, allows you that flexibility with your time. And when we look at planning your time, we build buffer zones in to allow for that adapting and pivot. That resilience comes from building your mental fitness. And a lot of those self-care activities help to build that mental fitness, just like your physical fitness. You train, you practice, you work with a trainer sometimes to help build the muscles for you to be strong enough to maybe climb the stairs, run after your grandkids, those kind of things. Building your mental fitness allows you to handle when life happens so that you don't have to unpack and stay there. You can bounce back, you can keep moving. And like I said, those boundaries are about saying yes in addition to saying no, and saying yes to the things that help you recharge. And so when I talk about self-care, it gets a bad rap as being fluffy and a luxury. Self-care is about the things that light you up, that recharge you, that re-energize you, and build your confidence as well. And so it's not just spa days and massages and getaways, because even though those are great, they're not sustainable on a daily basis. That'd be like eating on Sunday and thinking you're not going to be hungry by Tuesday. You
Yeah.
need daily practical self-care throughout your day, just like you eat 3 meals, you charge your phone several times. And so it involves more practical things such as how you eat, how you sleep, how you move, how you dress, how you decorate and organize your home, how you think about money, how you connect with others, as well as that traditional personal development like meditation, mindfulness, journaling, gratitude, and those types of things. And when you start to see it in a different way, there's so many opportunities and options to fit it in throughout your day. And it can be as simple as a 1-minute self-care practice, a 5-minute meditation, a 10-minute walk outside. There's all these micro ways to fit these practices in ways that, like I said, as small as 1 minute, science has shown lowers your cortisol levels, your heart rate, your stress levels, so that when life happens, you actually are in a good enough place to respond rather than react in an irrational way.
And it's interesting talking about, self-care. I had mentioned to somebody about 2 weeks ago, and it may have been about the time that we were rescheduling you to come on here. I was going through a lot of things between having my son here, my husband not being well for a while. I'm still recovering from a shoulder injury. And so I mentioned this person that I was taking a half a day of self-care. And she goes, "Oh, you're going for a massage?" I said, "No." And she started guessing all these wonderful things that most people think, "Oh, that's what you're going to go sit in the tub for a couple of hours." No.
Yeah.
And finally I said to her, my self-care, sometimes it's just walking away from the computer, taking that walk, thinking about things, or maybe my self-care is taking my husband to the doctor or something like that, because I would not be good for anything else if that's what I felt had to be done. And
Yeah.
she was very confused what self-care was. And I said,
Oh, yeah.
like you said, what recharges you?
It can be loud, it can be laughter, you can be with a group of people. You don't have to be alone. It's like I said, people have this vision of, sitting cross-legged in this Zen pose, and it's so much more than that. You think of, when you're cracking up with your friends, that leaves you energized and recharged just as much as, a quiet moment to yourself. It can be a workout and a super heavy sweat session. It could be meal planning for the week or cooking for your family. It could be a dance party in your kitchen. Like there's just all these micro ways that you can fit it in. Even just holding your cup of coffee in the morning, feeling the warmth, smelling your coffee, feeling it go down your throat, savoring the taste of it. That's a 30-second mindful practice that, again, with that intention, starts to make those shifts.
So do you see a difference from raising your kids now that they are young adults, that maybe they have less stress in their life than maybe some of their friends?
Not necessarily less stress. I think we all have stress. Even some of the happiest moments in our life are stress. It's about recognizing when it's too much and being able to take the space. I was sharing with someone, I had heard this analogy about the difference between stress and burnout. Imagine you're sitting in front of a bonfire and you keep putting logs on the fire and it's burning really orange and bright and hot. And then you keep putting fire logs on to the point that it completely burns out, and it's those gray ashes that you could barely fan a little orange flame from. But so if you still have stress, that you can keep that bonfire going if you give it space. Fire needs oxygen and room in order to grow. If you don't put the logs on so fast, if you strategically place where the logs are so that they're not right on top of each other, they have room between them. Again, how you're time blocking your activities with space in between, you can manage the stress in the way that keeps it a comfortable, warm fire without going to that point of burnout. So just recognizing, everyone's going to have stress. That's a normal part of life. Not letting it consume you and become you, and learning how to manage it in a way that you don't get lost in all of that is how you take care of yourself.
Well, I know about 15 years ago, I went through a very stressful burnout period of time. I was still working in corporate America, and I believed the more I worked, I was appreciated more and more, which I knew that wasn't true, but I kept telling myself it was true. And I went into work one day and I was just totally burned out. And somebody said something to me and I just started to cry. Could not stop sobbing. And I was
Mhm.
told, you need to take medical leave. And I looked at them like they were totally crazy. But I realized my hours basically were from 9 to 5, and I was coming in as early as 7:30 and not leaving till almost 7 o'clock. Because I
Wow.
just felt that the more I could get done, hey, isn't that better for me? And
Mhm.
not only was my manager in tune with what was going on, but my son was. And he was driving me home from work the day they mentioned I should go on medical leave. And he said, "You're depressed." And
Mhm.
I didn't want to accept it. But then I finally listened to his analogy of what I was going through. And I said, "You are absolutely right. I have burnt
Mhm.
myself out so badly." I said,
Yeah.
"I have to find a way to climb out." And I did. And luckily, I had
Mhm.
the support. But too many of us do that. And I think a lot of women do that because that just seems to be in our nature.
Yeah, like I said, we lose ourselves. We get to the point, especially if we're working and raising kids and all these other things, we forget, what do we like to do for fun? Who are we without these other labels and identities and that type of thing? And so, instead of waiting till the kids get older or go to college or things slow down at work, to start taking these micro moments to start reinvesting in yourself, finding out what you like to do, whether it's alone, with others, in all these different areas. How do you like to dress? What kind of food do you like to eat? What kind of decorations, colors, scents, textures do you enjoy having in your home? Slowly start to create this lifestyle, and it automates a lot of things so that it doesn't feel like you're adding more to your plate. It's becoming part of who you are. And when you automate them, is where, like you said, you start to climb, not only climb out of that hole, but stay there.
Absolutely. So, how can my listeners find you, get more information from you, or maybe get some coaching tips?
Absolutely. So my website, bestdlife.com, gives you access to my podcast, my blog posts. Um, you can order my book on there, Balance Breakthrough, which breaks down all of these things, my entire formula. It's a step-by-step guide to help you get through it. You can find me on social media at bestdlife, as well as email me at Daniela@bestdlife. I'd love to be able to get on a free coaching call and help support you in the areas that maybe you need a little extra support in right now and start you on your journey.
I love it. And all that information will be in the show notes. So, no excuse. You'll be able to find Daniela. And I want to thank you for joining us today and sharing some valuable information.
Thanks so much, Karen.
Thank you. Have a good day now. Bye bye.
You too.